Okay, everyone, welcome to the Adoption Town Hall number 2. Today we'll be focusing on brand. You can see the screen that I'm sharing. If there are any issues with being able to view it, please let me know. The way we're going to do this is we'll go through the deck as a whole. I'll try to get through it relatively quickly with the goal of having a discussion afterwards as part of the town hall process. So I'd suggest you may want like a pen or pencil or something just to take some notes if there are things that you would like to raise so that you don't forget by the time we get to the end. Last Adoption Town Hall we discussed the high level of adoption, and we spoke about strategy, and we talked about the 7 fundamentals that we need to review. This town hall we will be focusing on fundamental number 2, which is brand positioning, and we will have additional future town halls on an ongoing basis, focusing both on updates to our adoption strategy as well as the other fundamentals, so target audience, UX, distribution, etc. What you can expect from the presentation today. So you may already have noticed that look and feel is different. It's basically neutral, and that's because we're in the process of... So we're in the process of a look and feel review, and so you can expect to see changes in that, which you guys will be involved in. But today, we're not going to be talking about colors or pictures or logos, which is what a lot of people typically associate with brand, but rather the purpose of today is to make sure that when we are talking about brand, we're talking about the fundamentals of brand, and what that specifically means. For us to succeed, we need to have a shared, clear vision of what our purpose and values are. And we all need to be able to pull in the same direction of that purpose and values, which means we all need to share a clear sense of what they are, as well as being able to describe Sovryn in a consistent and simple way to other people. And that is the big goal of having a brand in the first place. And it's what we'll be primarily discussing today. And so what we always try to do at Sovryn is focus on the uncomfortable things, the dilemmas, or most accurately, the trade-offs. Because everything that we do is always a trade-off. There's always a price that we pay, and we need to be aware of the price that we're paying. And when it comes to brand, actually, before I jump into this, I'll come back to this in a moment. Just one other thing. We're going to continue this conversation in the forum. So I expect in about 2 days, so towards the end of this week, we'll be posting this deck in the forums for open discussion, as well as there's been a number of really great similar proposals, like people from the community who have been sharing with me, or just generally ideas, thoughts, and sometimes very, very detailed reviews of branding and other aspects of marketing. So that will be a great place to add these. But so this is not a one-way conversation discussion. It's a two-way conversation. Anyway, coming back to the central dilemma, I think we need to have a clear sense of what the central dilemma has been and will continue to be for us. And with Sovryn, when it comes to the brand, it's a question of describing what we've done in the past and have now versus where we're going in the future. Or a different way of thinking about it is describing what the concrete products versus what we're trying to build and what Sovryn meaningfully can be to people today and particularly tomorrow. One of the things that we've done and the choice that we've made has been we've described Sovryn quite narrowly, and in particular we focused on the past and we focused on the concrete. So we focused on things that we've already built instead of things that we're going to be building. We don't, with the exception of Zero, we don't tend to talk about coming products in the same to the same degree that other projects do. And when you look at our Twitter, our communications, our blog, most of the content is around the product and how you today can use the system. Obviously, that is extremely important, and we never want to give that up because we need to focus on the things that people engage with. However, when it comes to thinking about brand rather than sort of product marketing, we do ourselves a disservice if we aren't able to tell the full story of what Sovryn is aiming to be. We do ourselves a disservice in two ways. First of all, it doesn't allow people to understand where the project is going and to get excited about that. And also, it makes it more difficult for us as a community to galvanize the effort, to galvanize around pulling in the same direction to achieve our shared goals. And so we'll be discussing this dilemma a little bit over the course of this deck, and this will be something we come back to. And so, as always, this is crucially the beginning or the continuation of a conversation, not the final word. And what you're going to see here is definitely deeply a work in progress. And part of the goal here is to be able to err on the side of transparency, and also for us to work on these things together. All right, so diving into it, one of the core things that we said around brand when we presented the high level in the last town hall is that, Julio, can you please mute yourself? All right, and please mute anyone else who isn't muted. There's feedback. So right now, the way we're describing ourselves, the way the website talks about what Sovryn is, the way we typically talk about what we're doing in our community meetings, in the forum, etc., is very much the day-to-day of being a financial application, or what we could say is DeFi for Bitcoin. DeFi for Bitcoin is crucial in terms of where we are and where we want to get to, because as we've described in the black paper, we are looking to build out an operating system for a free market, operating system for finance of the future. However, Sovryn at the same time has been investing, certainly if you look at sort of dev resource time, a very, very significant chunk in hardcore infrastructure development. And that would be sort of akin to what you would be seeing with a layer 1 platform. And the reason this is important is because what we've seen is, in terms of value capture and mind share in space currently, sort of layer 1 systems, or even significant layer 2 systems like Arbitrum or zk-Sync, or maybe projects that it's not exactly clear what they are, but they're kind of like not exactly a layer 1, like Stacks. They've managed to capture a great deal of mindshare, certainly far beyond what you'd typically be able to capture as a dApp. I think this is backwards, and I've spoken about how I think this is a short-term view of the world, but we do need to be optimizing for capturing value and capturing mindshare. However, my sense is that the right way to do that is not to try and present ourselves or frame ourselves as a layer 1 platform, even if we could. And the reason is that I think if you look at the big winners in any space, and certainly in the crypto space, the big winners are those projects that can define and own a new category, rather than the Me Too projects, right? So obviously Bitcoin is an example of this. Obviously Ethereum is an example of this. Obviously Tether is an example of this, and the list goes on, right? The first mover in a new category is able to capture outsized value most typically. And I think I see, and I believe from my conversations with you guys, a lot of us see things going is that what Bitcoin represents is the first in a set of new institutions, borderless, permissionless, rules without ruler type institutions for a world which is post nation states. Right, we're starting to see the centrality of nation states being reduced. It's very, very clear that crypto and particularly Bitcoin represent a alternative in a world which is desperate for alternatives. And so I think what we're looking to do, because it's our mission, but also in terms of what we're describing, so that people can understand where we're going and so that we can own the position category, is leapfrog. Skip the whole layer one thing and go directly to talking about what is, the next step, and I think final step for cryptographic property systems, which is creating a full set of
Iago, I don't know if it's just me, but you seem to be
ultimately,
cutting out.
The question here, I'm cutting out?
A little bit.
Hello?
Yeah, could you just
who?
that sentence over again?
All right.
A lot of it for me.
All right. I will try to reposition myself in a way which hopefully will lead to better connectivity. Give me a second. Okay, so what I've presented up until this point has been a preamble of where we are, and now what I'd like to do is go into the meat and potatoes of it. Effectively, what we're trying to answer here in the question of brand is who is sovereign, all right? And so the first thing we need to discuss is what is the problem that Sovryn needs to solve and also needs to be able to express to the world. And we've spent a bunch of time looking at this, and I want to give you guys a sense of where we are here. We are trying to do something novel and complicated. A lot of the time, I think we don't even have the proper words to describe these things sort of like shorthand. Like if you had said to someone 2 years ago, we're a layer one system, no one would know what the fuck you're talking about. Today, it's shorthand that is recognized by a lot of people, or DeFi is shorthand that is recognized by a lot of people, and so they understand what you're saying. We're still in early stages, and so frequently it's going to be more awkward and require more words for us to describe what we're doing. And so we've tried a bunch of different things, but the problem that I think, the problem description I think that we have most succinctly now is that never before in all of human history have people had more opportunity to be free, and yet at the same time being so powerless at the hands of centralized institutions. We have this weird situation where the internet and digital technologies and cryptography have provided us with the tools to be free as individuals in a way which has never before been available, and at the same time, those same tools are being used for surveillance and control, which goes far beyond the surveillance and control that any we've ever seen in history. And so there's this battle line that is being that is perhaps the central battle line of our time, and that's the problem, right? We need to win that battle. And so, what is the solution? The solution that Sovryn is looking to provide is to build a world built on the ethos of Bitcoin, which means that it needs to be global and borderless, it needs to be voluntary and opt-in, and it needs to provide for rules without rulers. I just want to check with you guys, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yep. Yeah, much better.
All right, awesome. All right, so that's the solution. And what I'm trying to do here, guys, as we're building out this, is the the goal here is to create the language, the words, the shared sort of words that we can use to describe and understand what it is that we're doing together, and particularly to be able to describe it right externally. All right, so what does that mean? Right, it means that Sovryn's mission is to provide individuals with the technology, the education, and the community, right, for us to be able to work together to become self-sovereign. And one way that I think we can try and summarize that in a sentence is that Sovryn's goal is to provide the machinery of freedom. And the way we do that, because it's a broad goal, is we build a new type of nation, a borderless alliance of free sovereigns, of sovereign individuals. And the reason I think this is maybe the shorthand that best describes this as nation is if you think about what a nation does. Going back to here, right? It provides community, it provides education, and it provides institutional technology, right? Which we're actually building with like digital technology, but institutional technology includes things like courts, constitutions, systems of law, systems of policing, right? All of these things are effectively technologies that have been developed over time and now can be made far more objective through digitization. And so that brings us back to why this graphic makes sense, where what we're basically doing is creating a new type of nation. All right, so then what the fuck is a sovereign nation? What does that even mean? And certainly it's not apparent how what sovereign is now encapsulates this idea. And so we need to be able to fully express how where we are now gets us to where we're going and where that place that we're going is. All right, so what is nationhood? I would say that we can describe what nationhood is on two levels, right? There's the theory or the way what a nation is, and then the practice of how we as sovereign create it, right? So nationhood is a common set, or what is known as the commons, that is shared by a group of people. And that means a common currency, common principles, common governance, culture and norms, lingo and narratives or language, and common set of incentives or shared fate. So how do we create this with Sovryn? And how is the stuff that we've already built part of that? So obviously governance, plutocracy, and sub-DAOs. Having shared set of rules then extends to the most important set of rules that we have, right? Effectively, all rights can be and should be understood to be property rights. And the way free individuals can interact is through the free market. And so you have to have the ability to create the free market, which goes beyond anarchy, right? It needs to be self-regulating. And so when we talk about sovereign as like stage one sovereign, black paper sovereign, as the operating system for a free market, that's why that was such a core piece of it and why it's obviously the first thing that we need to be working on. But then we also need to be working on canon of common content around things like, written values, a constitution, educating people, providing the tools to educate people around what it means to be sovereign, how they can protect their privacy, how they can achieve self-sovereignty, and also so that we can have a shared set of understandings around how we approach the world. And then where we haven't really started tackling, and this is where I think, these are the interesting places that we will start to really differentiate ourselves and need to be part of our roadmap, is real-life community and services. And so that means localized communities in different places of the world. You can think of them as like embassies. It means being able to provide the key services that you would think of a nation providing. Things like insurance, security, educational tooling. Now, Sovryn has already started doing some of this. although it hasn't been publicized yet, in terms of trying to provide core sort of protections to sovereign community members, and I'll be publishing something around that soon. But when I publish it, it will become obvious why we couldn't have spoken about it before. But I think this is going to become increasingly something that we're going to need to work on, and will be a priority in terms of what Sovryn as a community is working on. And then there are bigger things, right? Which I think sort of like the ultimate reflections of this will be having zones of geographic autonomy, right? What you consider today, like the first thing that a nation thinks of is like what territories do we control? There's a way that needs to be reflected through Sovryn itself. And then there's the ability for us as an alliance of sovereigns to have a united voice and be able to negotiate with other entities, many of which do not believe in the sovereignty of an individual, but negotiate as an allied confederacy or commonwealth, so that we have strength that goes beyond just the strength of any given individual. And the way that our branding is going to make sense is as we start to explain what these things mean, how we're going after them, and reflect them in the actions that we are taking. But perhaps the easiest way for us to understand this, I think, is that a sovereign nation is different from the current set of nations that we have, in that a sovereign nation is a stakeholder-owned nation. In other words, the citizens very, very clearly and directly own the nation, and you can consider the nation to not just be a set of services or public goods, but also to be effectively a profit-generating enterprise. Now, every single nation is a profit-generating enterprise, although they try to pretend that they're not, right? Religious nations, right? So if you think about the Catholic Church, massively wealthy. If you think about countries, massively wealthy. But they pretend to be a public commons. And then as a result, they end up being kleptocracies. One of the differences that a sovereign nation would have to encapsulate is that it would make no bones. It would be absolutely clear that this is a stakeholder-owned nation, which means that it's a profit-generating nation for its citizens. All right. So what this means is that we, in terms of our branding, need to continue to be able to talk about DeFi and a financial operating system, but also be able to move beyond it. And so I'd like to present two different ways of thinking about our USP. If you think about our USP, our unique selling proposition, right? How you would describe Sovryn in the DeFi space, right? If we wanted to try and create the best brand for that, right? One way that we could do that is to say that Sovryn is the only DeFi project that builds on both the principles and the technology of Bitcoin. In other words, does DeFi without sacrificing security or privacy in favor of speed, and takes a long-term view on how to protect the people who are utilizing the technology. And this has a very clear target audience, right? It's Bitcoiners who want to maximize the yield that they can generate with Bitcoin, who prefer decentralized exchanges over centralized exchanges, believe that Bitcoin and decentralization is a path through humanity's future, etc. And we've discussed that target audience many times. I think that target audience is a highly educated target audience, and as a highly educated target audience is also a very limited target audience. It's sort of what we have always thought of as our early adopters, and I think everyone on this call represents this kind of user. But we want to go beyond that. And I think that's also one of the motivations and one of the reasons that we need to go to what I'm calling USP number 2, and where I think we're going to have more and more of an emphasis, which is that Sovryn is the first nation built on the principles of Bitcoin. And what we discussed is that it's owned by its users, it's permissionless, it's global, etc. And then that actually means that we go beyond just talking about being a product, but it means we need to talk about the mission of the product and the mission of its users. So who would use Sovryn? It's people who want to build their own self-sovereignty and effectively increase their own control over their destinies, as well as participate in creating a world where it becomes easier for other people to do the same thing. Now, one of the key things, and perhaps what all this brings you to as you're working on branding, is it should create a shared set of values so that everyone who's working on the project and anyone who's engaging with the project can identify with these values and know what Sovryn stands for. And we've all seen, or probably most of us have seen, corporate value statements, right? And they're horrible. They're like, everything nice in the world is us, and as a result, we don't know what we are. So what I'd like to propose is that with Sovryn, we need to do something a little bit different. We need to talk about our values on a limited basis. So we need to have relatively few values. We need to then explain those values through discipline. In other words, these are the disciplines that we need to maintain, both as individuals and as a community, in order to achieve these values. And then finally, and this part I haven't added yet, and this whole thing is a work in progress because we'll have to decide on these things together, but we should also make very explicit what the trade-offs are, because everything has a price. And so the values that I think are already being demonstrated by Sovryn and that we now need to make explicit are things like integrity. Integrity of the system, which is security, pragmatism, the willingness to iterate, long-term dedication and focus, a focus on rationality. In other words, that's transparency, curiosity around the world, like the fact that as Bitcoiners, we're one of the few Bitcoin communities that knows what's happening in the rest of crypto. A focus on collecting and making decisions on the basis of data. Humility, like when trolls come into our forums, we still listen to them and try to find the best in what they're saying. Things like collaboration, which means inclusivity, the ability to be pseudonymous, the desire for all of us to be able to have and constantly work on making it easier for us to all participate and take initiative. And then optimism in terms of a focus on innovation. And one of the things that I think maybe we could put, we need to find a different way of expressing is playfulness. Kind of like what we were doing with the comics. I think there are better ways of doing it. And then the other key thing that you typically want to see in a branding document is tone of voice. How does the brand sound when it's providing content, when it's CMs, community managers are talking, and also what does just the culture of the users sound like? And especially the last 2 weeks have given us opportunity to think about what is the tone of voice or the personality of Sovryn as a whole. And one way that I've come to start describing it is that to be Sovryn is to be a gentleman and a scholar. And what that means is to be a gentleman is to maintain one's principles, one's integrity, to bow to no one else, to be sovereign, but to do so in a way which is mature and respectful rather than hateful and toxic. And to be a scholar means to maintain humility, or what I call epistemic humility. In other words, recognize that there is there are limits to what we're doing. We're probably making mistakes all the time. Trying to figure out what those mistakes are, so when people are criticizing us, still manning those criticisms, trying to make those criticisms better or express those criticisms better than our critics can, and learn from them, and constantly maintain a sense of curiosity around the world around us, including and perhaps especially in terms of adversarial thinking around those who we consider our adversaries. And so to summarize, where I think we are right now, or what I would propose very, very high level summary for the Sovryn brand, is two things. First, I think we need to be courageous in terms of our message and be willing to expand from being very past and concrete oriented. In other words, going from DeFi for Bitcoin and a financial operating system to being able to talk more and articulate more what it means to be a sovereign nation and the operating system for individual sovereignty. And what that might look like in terms of a motto or a slogan might be, and this is the hardest part, right? It's being able to try and encapsulate all of these abstract and complex ideas in a very, very simple and pithy way. Sovryn is the machinery of freedom, or building a world on Bitcoin, or add your proposal here. And so that's a high-level review both in terms of our strategy and where we are, with the goal not of this being the final word, but allowing all of us to start participating in this conversation. And the reason we're not showing any branding or imagery right now is because it all rests on the decisions that we as a community come to around these things. And with that, I think we should open it up to everyone.
I have a question. Early in the beginning, you said a world built on the ethos of Bitcoin. Why not just built on Bitcoin?
It's a great question, and it's something I've been struggling with a little bit. I think there are two reasons. One is I think it's ambiguous about what built on Bitcoin means. So, for example, is wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum built on Bitcoin? Is Stacks built on Bitcoin? Is Rootstock built on Bitcoin? Like, everyone has a different opinion on what built on Bitcoin means. But it goes deeper than that, which is that I'm not sure that Sovryn will always be best served. Who's this? Okay. I'm not sure that Sovryn will always be best served by being built strictly on the technological platform that is Bitcoin. And the reason I believe that might not be the ultimate way forward is because I think it depends to a great deal on what technology we're able to bring to Bitcoin. So the way I view Sovryn is one of the missions that we have is to prove the value and utility of building on Bitcoin such that we'll be able to fund the development of technologies which will allow us, for example, to have roll-ups directly onto Bitcoin main chain, or be able to make it so obvious that we need to introduce changes, if changes are necessary to Bitcoin main chain, like BIP 300, that those things will actually happen and pass. But it may be the case that those things never happen, and that the technology, if I thought that the current peg that we have, right, the rootstock peg system that we have is sort of like the end of the road, that's the best that we would ever get, I think we would need to think seriously about how we rethink our strategy, right? And so I think we need to maintain some degree of flexibility. In the current state of the technology that we have is not good enough. Doesn't achieve everything we want to achieve. I think we can and are building tooling to make it better. But how far we can go with what we're trying to build is somewhat dependent on where Bitcoin goes, and that's not entirely in our hands.
Yeah, I've got one. So Sovryn is a gentleman and a scholar, and we are using financial instruments, financial tools that could be advanced, could be challenging to use, might not be trivial for everyone. And I think I keep on repeating that education is crucial to onboard people to start using Bitcoin. Those who haven't done so yet. Is there any positioning of Sovryn for us to basically address those people, entry-level Bitcoiners?
I think so, yes. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can do that, and we're working on most of them. So the easiest way to do this is to provide people with tools or entryways which feel very familiar to them. So for example, if we integrate with existing Bitcoin services and wallets, you guys saw, or maybe some of you saw, that I had a conversation with Jameson Lopp from Casa around doing something like this. And we've been having other conversations with similar types of players. There's also similar types of things which would open us up to an even broader audience, like integration directly into things like neobanks and things like that. So that's one strategy, which is sort of like having third-party interfaces integrate with us, or what I would call channel partners. Then there's the ongoing work to improve the UI and UX experience that Sovryn app provides, as well as introduce a mobile application. So this is work that is being done by core as well as other community members. Then there's educational tooling that we can do. And then another thing, which is to go beyond what we're currently doing with CM. So for example, one of the things that I think it was Sweden did is Sweden created a hotline number, and you can call Sweden. And what it will do is they've got people who are like, Swedes who have volunteered to speak to people from around the world about Sweden. And so if you call that number, it will route you to a Swedish person. You can talk to them about anything you want. Though typically it will be about Sweden. I think we could do something like that with Sovryn, right? So like imagine you come to the Sovryn website, right? And you can, click to schedule an introductory session with a Sovryn, right? And then we could all volunteer to be, the people who walk people through their first experience. So I think there's a lot of different things that we can do to not just focus on sort of Bitcoiners, but really go beyond that to people who, this is their first experience with cryptographic property in general.
Okay, thanks.
Any other thoughts? Maybe criticisms or things that you thought you were hoping to see but didn't, or extra ideas or notes that you took while you were listening?
How do you see Sovryn being playful aside from the art and the comics?
Was that D. John Philly asking?
No, Englandia.
Oh, Englandia. Okay, D. John, I think, I've been in a little bit of conversation with you, so I'd be interested to hear your views as well. But first I'll talk to Englandia's question. So I think it's by letting our personalities shine through, and I'm not exactly sure how that's going to play out. In the first months of Sovryn, I think there was more of it. So first of all, there was a lot of creativity and experimentation. That's sort of where the comics thing came from in the first place. But there was also like, one of the most popular channels in the very early days of Sovryn, even before anything was launched, and maybe because it was before anything was launched, was the memes channel, and people were just creating a whole bunch of different memes. I think it's through tone of voice. I think to an extent we need to get back there. And one of the reasons that I think we maybe aren't doing it as much right now is because there has been this massive focus on building out the core. Like core team has been pretty introverted and sort of inwards looking over the last probably more than 6 months. And the reason is towards the middle and end of last year, the amount of stuff being pushed out at rapid pace was very, very high. And then over the last quarter, it's been a lot about reorganizing, consolidating the teams so that we can work better as a team, and dealing with technical debt. And I think core team, the way it approaches these things and the emphasis it places on these things, obviously impacts the way the community as a whole thinks about these things and behaves. So, there are a lot of things that we could be doing that we haven't been doing. We haven't been doing as many events as we should or could have been doing. We, haven't placed a big emphasis on swag. We haven't been doing that many NFT things, which I think is sort of like the more fun or cultural part. And I suspect that over the coming months, we'll start to see all these things sort of come back with a vengeance. And already I think we're starting to see it.
We do have a question from Jin Kazama from YouTube saying, what is the risk of failure for the Sovryn project as a whole? And in case of such an outcome, what is the path forward in your opinion?
So that's a difficult question for me to answer. It's very broad. I'm not sure if that is directly related to the branding. If so, maybe they can sort of elucidate how they see that as connected to branding. If it isn't connected to the branding, one of the things that I'm sort of on the back burner have been writing is sort of an answer exactly to that question, which is what do I think are the risks? This is basically, I've been writing a little blog post, which is like the year is 2026 and Sovryn has failed. Why did it fail? And sort of trying to imagine what things could cause Sovryn to fail. Because I think it's important for us to first discuss failure modes so that we can correct for them, but also to be aware of sort of have the ability to prioritize between different risks to the project. So for example, over the last 2 weeks, there's been a lot of discussion around tokenomics. And this is one of the things that motivated me to start writing the blog post. My personal view is that tokenomics is pretty far down the list in terms of actual problems and risks with the system. I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but there's a lot of other things that I'd be much more concerned about in terms of things that could cause the project to fail. There's technological risk. There's security risks. Like imagine there was a big hack. There's the fact that we don't manage to break out of what I think is right now a great user base, but quite niche, which is Bitcoiners who are aware enough of DeFi to want to participate in it, but also aware enough of Bitcoin not to want to participate in Ethereum DeFi. Right? I mean, so there's a lot of things that we need that I would put well above sort of tokenomics in terms of potential things that if we don't deal with them could lead to failure of the project, or at least it not accomplishing its full potential.
DJ on Philly?
Hey, yeah.
Yeah, the thing that still leaves me wanting is something that could be actionable in the short term. It's just like something that we can, as a community, begin to put out to our networks, our communities, outside of the echo chamber that we live in within the Citadel, the forums, and the dojo, that can help bring in or, use to introduce new users. And that's what I think one of the things is missing from an adoption standpoint, and I would like to hear kind of addressed more directly.
Sure. So let me address that directly. That is, from my perspective, not a priority right now. And let me explain why I think it's not a priority.
Please.
I think it's not a priority first because I agree with the general idea that the UI UX of our system right now is not as good as it could be. One of the things, just as an example of several examples, is off-ramps from FastBTC are still quite limited, and we had an issue with FastBTC over the course of the weekend, right? What I would want is when I bring on a new user, I want them to have like the, Apple experience, right? I want them to have a smooth, awesome experience that they want to come back. And I don't want to be bringing thousands and thousands of new users who are going to get confused or lost or have a bad experience, or because they don't know how to use the system, lose some money, right? So that's one reason. The second reason is in terms of the products that we have now, I think we're great for building out the hardcore audience that we have. But if we want to go to the next level, and particularly if we want to do so as a project which is Bitcoin focused, I think we need to allow people to trade a much wider range of things with much better liquidity, and I think perpetual swaps allows them to do that with only having to hold Bitcoin. And even bigger and sort of more popular, what I think is like, if I had to put a big bet on what I think is like the biggest mainstream product for us, I think it's it's Zero, right? The ability, it's like something that nobody else has, and is clearly a huge amount of desire around. And so that's the second thing, right? I think it's having mainstream sort of products, or what I would call killer apps. And then the third thing is, I think we trip if we try to run before we can walk. And specifically, I think having nailing the branding, nailing the website, getting all of us sort of like building out the tooling so that we can scale our efforts, right? Like, what I was talking about with the the Swedish phone call. Like if we had something like that, then I would feel much more comfortable having 1,000 new users a day, potentially getting confused because we would have a better way of dealing with it. So we're in the process of putting all of these things in place, right? We're going to be rolling out the whitelisted version of Zero. We're going to be rolling out a whitelisted version of PerpSops. We're going to continue to use the community that we have here already, which by the way is growing, but growing slowly, to nail those products. And then my feeling is that in terms of long-term focus, the way the project becomes healthiest and does best is we get ourselves to a point where second half of this year we can really, starting, say, let's call it around July-ish, we really are in a very comfortable position to start pouring fuel onto the fire.
So is that the target for implementing more of these types of adoption activities once we have perps up, Zero up, upgraded the UI, and know that those things are stable, possibly even doing further things to stabilize fast BTC? What will be or is there a general idea of what audience we're going for? Because I know one of the things that you and I went back and forth about was the whole wrapped Bitcoin issue. And that's an $11 billion market of people that are already using their Bitcoin in a decentralized way, but it's wrapped with Ethereum. And I think the analogy I gave you was, you don't silver plate gold. So why Ethereum wrap Bitcoin?
Right. So I agree with you, and you know that, and I know that, and the people on this call know that, right? But we one of the things that we need to do is also nail the content that explains that properly. So when we announced Operation Champion 3 weeks ago, the goal was to basically use this quarter, right? The basically 90 days, and these town halls are part of it, to put together the fundamental tooling that we need, galvanize the community, start doing the things that you're talking about. So we've already started a bunch of different initiatives, both in terms of creating new content, trying new content channels, and things like Sovryn Mayhem. But we're doing them relatively on a small scale right now because you can think of them as probes, right? What we're doing now over the course of the 90 days is figuring out what's most effective so that we can go big, and basically, putting all of the pieces in place so that we can go big in a sustainable and scalable way.
Okay. One more thing, then I'll yield. On the rewards tab, there's a section for referrals, for people to receive referrals, but it still says pending. Are there any plans in the adoption roadmap or that you can disclose to us now how that may work or be implemented in the future?
Sorry, I didn't catch. What was the part on the UI?
On the rewards tab, I believe there's a part for receiving referral bonuses or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a good point. So we built out an entire system around that. But we're working with, I think this is one of those things where we kind of tripped, right? We got ahead of ourselves. So we started building it out before we had identified the right person to help manage it, because referrals is a very difficult thing to manage, and particularly in the in the crypto space, because it's all bearer assets, right? So usually, let's say your typical referral program will be deposit $200 into this new service, and then you and your friend both get $10. The nice thing about that is, you've got KYC. You can make sure that it's not the same user doing it 100 times. You can make sure that they're not also their friend. You can make sure that they don't pull their money out immediately after they put it in, because they need to, make X number of transactions first before they can get the reward, or at least withdraw the reward. We can't do any of that, or at least not easily. We would need to build entire smart contract infrastructure to manage it. So probably the thing that we should do is just remove that referral from the UI because it will take more time. But we have an interim solution, which is, as we start to introduce channel partners, we can effectively, because they have all the advantages of centralized services, we can effectively start doing the referral systems in partnership with them and through them, and basically bring on their audiences. which is which the way I think of it is a more sophisticated and more data-driven way of acquiring customers than say airdrops. But it's basically like, it's like sophisticated airdrops.
Okay. I had a couple of ideas. I'll send what I was thinking about over to you just so you can get a look at it and give me some feedback on it. Thank you very much for your time. I yield the floor.
Thank you. And I'd love to see what you have because I know you're passionate about this topic and have great ideas. Thank you. Anything else, guys? This will be available. Like we'll put up the presentation and create a thread on the forum to start discussing it by the end of the week.
Rafi Blockchain asked from YouTube, how can I help to disseminate information to people for them to learn about the Sovryn neonation and to know more about the machinery for freedom?
Okay, so to the first part of your question, one of the goals of Operation Champion is to build out tools to make it much easier for everyone, and particularly community members, to galvanize. And we've been looking at a bunch of different approaches that we can take this. One of them, and some of them we've already implemented. So there's already like the first DAO, which is a community DAO focused on marketing. It's called the Whispers DAO. There's the Factory DAO, which is introducing tooling, which will make it easier. And there's a number of other things that we're working on. Some of it was delayed, and so stuff that we were looking to start addressing, but because Miami consumed a lot of sort of the adoption team's time, hasn't happened yet. But over the course of the coming weeks, we expect to start providing clearer and easier ways for everyone to get involved. The second part of the question was, how can we better describe the machinery of freedom? And that is a difficult question to answer because I think it's a combination of a lot of good content, which will take time to create and which we'll be creating over the course of probably the coming years. Although, we need to be able to describe what we can right now. And so one of the things that I think we should be doing, and we are working on, or the work has started, is on the creation of like a new revised black paper. And then the second thing, and this is going to be the much more important thing, is show, don't tell, right? So we need to be able to demonstrate the steps that we're already taking towards these things. And so there's some things that we'll be able to start talking about over the course of the coming weeks that I'll be able to write about, and that these things will become, I think, more and more apparent over time. And then finally, what we'd like to do before this quarter is out is we've published a roadmap, but the roadmap still is very much a infrastructure and financial tooling roadmap. That's basically 90% of it. I think we need to start adding in the additional elements that we've discussed here today into the roadmap, and that means extending the roadmap far beyond the end of this year. We're almost out of time. I think we have time for one more comment, question, or whatever. So if anyone would like to add anything, otherwise we can start closing it out.
I have a question. I think it's related to brand. So one of your most popular videos, Iago, is your video where you talk about the evils of KYC. And it sounds like, to reach quote unquote mainstream audiences, you're talking about, partnering with a bunch of services that, use KYC. Have you thought about how we can actually rid ourselves of this evil of KYC and kind of stay true to the, sovereignty of individuals and basically achieve our goals without KYC?
I mean, I think about that a lot. I don't think that there's any way for us to it's not any way, but I want to go to this slide. It was sort of like the values slide in the disciplines. So one of the the first one I actually mentioned is integrity, right? The integrity of our principles, the integrity of our system. But the disciplines that I mentioned include pragmatism. So one of the slogans that we have in Sovryn is, you shouldn't have to be technical to be free. And the basic message there is, we want to be able to bring as much liberty as possible to as many people as possible. And sometimes we describe it as the ladder of sovereignty. You kind of start off, entirely not sovereign, and you then slowly make your way to higher and higher levels of self-sovereignty. So that's background to the answer which I'm going to give, which is that Sovryn should always provide for a totally zero KYC experience, even if you want to use fiat. And so, for example, we've integrated with BISC to allow people to actually have a fiat on-ramp, which is zero KYC. We have an integration with Transact, which allows for minimal or close to zero KYC under certain limits. And we have been talking to TBD, the Jack Dorsey project, around how we can provide zero KYC on-ramps and off-ramps. But for a lot of people, the easiest way to onboard will probably be through some kind of centralized intermediary, some of whom will use KYC. So, for example, I mentioned Casa. Casa actually is centralized or semi-centralized. Well, certainly it's a corporation, but it doesn't have KYC, strictly speaking. So I think it's a gradient, and I don't think my approach would be, we provide Sovryn wherever we can, even if that means sometimes some of the people are being KYC'd. And we give them the path towards getting out of that.
Isn't that just like we providing the services, and if someone wants to use it without KYC, they can? But if a centralized exchange or centralized service uses our services while they do require KYC, it's still within our parameters of being sovereign? Isn't that?
Yeah, I think that's how I view it. Like, one of the things with being permissionless is that anyone, including a centralized service that uses KYC, can integrate with us. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up now. I will say this. One of the more frustrating aspects of sort of these types of presentations, because they're remote, is it's very hard for me to gauge or assess I hear myself talking much more than I hear you guys talking. And I kind of want to hear, even if you don't have a comment, I always like to try and get a sense of how you guys are thinking about it. So when we put this up into the forum, I'd be very interested just to hear sort of your opinions on the work that we've done and the way we're thinking about it. Beyond that, I hope this was informative, and stay sovereign, everyone.